A good name is better than precious ointment, in the day of death than the day of birth. It is better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting, for this is the end of all mankind, and the living will lay it to heart. Sorrow is better than laughter, for by sadness of face the heart is made glad. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of birth. It is better for a man to hear the rebuke of the wise than to hear the song of fools. For as the crackling of thorns under a pot, so is the laughter of the fools. This also is vanity. Surely oppression drives the wise into madness, and a bribe corrupts the heart. Better is the end of a thing than its beginning, and the patient in spirit is better than the proud in spirit. Be not quick in your spirit to become angry, for anger lodges in the heart of fools. Say not, why were the former days better than these? For it is not from wisdom that you ask this. Wisdom is good with an inheritance, an advantage to those who see the sun. For the protection of wisdom is like the protection of money, and the advantage of knowledge is that wisdom preserves the life of him who has it. Consider the work of God. Who can make straight what he has made crooked? In the day of prosperity be joyful, and in the day of adversity consider. God has made the one as well as the other, so that man may not find out anything that will be after him.
Good morning, Life Fellowship. It's good to see you on the second service of our morning. To those who are watching online, thank you for joining us as well. It's always good to hear from you all as well, so please keep in touch with us by sending us a message or just leaving us a comment as you're watching this morning or later on this week. Thank you for being faithful last week. Last week I was out of town, and so Pastor Justin spoke. He had a super busy week this week, and I'm so thankful for his ministry in our midst. Pastor Justin is also our student ministry pastor. He did a great job teaching through Ecclesiastes 5 last week, but this week we had our Revival, that's what it was, Revival conference for our teenagers. It was great. I can't remember the name of it, but it was really awesome. But he asked me to speak, and I spoke on how to hear God's voice to two groups of our young people. And by the way, we just have some of the greatest young people on the planet here. Sometimes if you've got parents of teenagers, you just wonder whether or not, our civilization is going to survive. Well, let me just tell you, our teenagers are just off the hook. They are just wonderful. Some of you were working in it yesterday, by the way, you adult volunteers. Thank you for being a part of that. But I left really, really encouraged. There's so many good things going on, and because of the pandemic, we can't highlight them, and because, we're in and out and so forth, it's hard to see. I was just watching the praise team this morning. Do you realize we had teenagers up here this morning? We had 20-somethings, 30-somethings, 40-somethings, and 50-somethings on the praise team. Very specific. Our goal is that we have a multi-generational church. So we've got two teaching pastors of different age. We've got older elders. We've got younger who are being discipled for future elderships. It's very strategic because I think it's very, very healthy. Having a perspective of life from beginning to the end is important, and that's part of what we're going to be talking about this morning in Ecclesiastes Chapter 7. We're going to be finishing this book up during the month of November. So after today, we've got 2 more weeks of Ecclesiastes. Then we're going to take a break for the Christmas season, and we've got a series of sermons on Christmas themes, and we have communion together as a church family. Even in a pandemic, we're going to do it carefully, but we're going to have it on the last Sunday of the year. Then beginning in January, we're going to do a 9-week series on the Beatitudes that I'm really excited about. We're not planning a full year in advance simply because of the pandemic, so we're kind of going in quarters at this point. But tentatively, we're looking at some things for missions in March, and then April, we've got Easter and a couple things going on, and then we may be looking at something with worldview and apologetics and another book study in the spring as well. So we've got things moving forward. I want you to always know that, even though we're kind of disjointed disappointed because of the pandemic. God's doing some really cool things. By the way, last week, the reason I wasn't here is because I was in at Hilton Head at a conference for the Timothy Initiative, our church planting partners. Last year, you remember, we did our first big offering for them. And so we wanted to do it again this year. And we were setting our goal. How can we do? For $300, you can train a church planter. And by the way, I've got some videos I'm going to be putting on social media. I think we may show one in church here in the next week or two that shows you the churches that are now being planted with what we gave last year. And we've also we've made a commitment that we're going to adopt a state in India where there's hundreds of millions of people living who do not know the gospel. And so we're going to be planting thousands of churches there over the next 3 to 5 years. So that's something we're doing. But we were trying to decide. I was talking with Carolyn Kozlowski, who heads our missions team, and Bennett, who's on our staff, who works with us, and the rest of our team. What's a reasonable goal to have? What can we expect in the middle of a pandemic where people are in and out and so forth? So we said, let's push. We talked about, could we do 30 more churches next year? Could we do 35? And so we said, let's try for 50. So we'll try to plant 50 churches, which is $15,000. So I just want you to know that last week I took a check from Life Fellowship Church, and instead of doing 50 churches, we ended up doing 100 churches. All right. So I took a check for $30,000. And we're planning in 100 churches. And by the way, I've seen more banks come in, so we'll be writing another check to take us even above that. But praise the Lord. Thank you for your faithfulness. It's been so cool also during this pandemic how, we're now seeing some people come back to volunteering that had stopped because of the pandemic. Thank you for that. By the way, I know the pandemic is still going on and so forth, but North Carolina is 46 out of 50 on the good end of that. So hopefully we're seeing the end at the light of the tunnel. And now you got the vaccine coming. So hopefully we'll be able to get back to normal before too awful long. But we're making plans for that. The elders approved the other night for me to present an opportunity to those of you who want to participate to do some upgrades in the kid life. I know a lot of folks at the end of the year, you take a look at your giving, say, I've got a little extra chunk I'd like to give. Well, we've got a couple of projects. One of them is an upgrade in the kid life, because when our kids come back after the pandemic, we want it to be a place where it's very practical, very exciting for them. So we've got some things going on. We've got a discipleship thing area that they're wanting to emphasize. We've got new life groups starting across, so many good things. So do not be discouraged. I know things sometimes seem bleak. It's 2020 all year long, right? Do not be discouraged. God is doing some good things. And I think there's a good reminder about this in Ecclesiastes Chapter 7. We're not going to do every single chapter in the next several weeks, but I want to hit some points that allow us to see the transition of Solomon's thinking, the preacher, as he's preaching to the ecclesia, to his assembly, and what's going on. Now, there's a transition that occurs between chapter 6 and chapter 7 because it's halfway through the book. In fact, chapter 6, verse 10 is the exact halfway point. The first half of the book, we kind of have this darkness that's coming from Solomon as he's kind of, doing the intro. He's kind of contemplating. He's an old man. He's seen it all. He's done it all. He's had it all. And he's saying it's all just a bunch of smoke and mirrors. It's all just a vapor. It's Havel. It's just here it is, and then it's gone, and nothing seems to really matter. And in the midst of it, he kept saying, so just enjoy what you can. Enjoy the life you have. Enjoy it where it's okay. But as he's transitioning, he's now moving to something deeper and more contemplative. And he says, don't just live on the good parts of life, but he says, I want you to understand the life that you are living. Understand where you're at today and what's ahead of you. And so as we kind of close out our study, I want to kind of shift our emphasis to just looking deeper into the life we have. That at times seems very 2020-ish. At times, it seems like a lot of smoke and mirrors. At times, it seems like there's a lot of tragedy and not enough hope. I get that. But Solomon is saying we got to quit looking at life as if we're the center of the universe. God is doing something bigger, and we're not all that. But we are part of what God is doing that glorifies himself and that completes his plan and his will. And in that, we find our peace. And in that, we find our place. And in that, we find our purpose as well. So we heard the first 14 verses of chapter 7 read. And there is something that I want to kind of point out to you as we get started. And by the way, it's one of the rules I emphasize from time to time on how we understand Scripture a little better. It's a rule of kind of a rule of hermeneutics. It's a rule of study, and it's one of it is called the rule of repetition. When God repeats something multiple times, he does so to get our attention or to introduce a theme. If you were listening carefully, you may have picked up on a word that was used repetitively in this passage of Scripture. If not, let me see if I can help you find it. If you look in verse 1 of chapter 7, it says, a good name is better than precious ointment. In verse 2, it says, it's better to go to the house of mourning. In verse 3, it says, sorrow is better than laughter. In verse 5, it says, it is better for a man to hear the rebuke of the wise. In verse 8, better is the end of a thing than is its beginning. Are you getting the theme yet? All right. It's the word better. And we need to understand in the context of what Solomon was saying here, is he's saying there is a better way to see things. There is a better way to look at it. At times, you look at your choices and you say they seem kind of the same, or they seem without hope, or they seem unrelated. And yet, in the midst of it, what we have is Solomon speaking to his congregation, and he says, there is a better path forward. And I want you to have that in your mind as we look at these verses today. You know, when I was a kid, I had such a good time with our teenagers. And again, I know I'm repeating myself, but man, I just love young people. I started off as a middle school English teacher, high school English teacher, then a school principal. I told the kids, and they looked at me like I was 1,000 years old, but I've literally been in school for 54 years. 54 years without stop, either as a student, as a teacher, or an administrator, or a professor. I have consistently, without one single year gap, been part of education. So I love working with young people. I love their honoriness. I love their inquisitiveness. I love everything about it. And as I was teaching yesterday and looking at it, I was thinking about when I was their age. And I grew up in church. And I grew up in a church culture, and we had youth activities on Friday night. Some of you grew up, remember Friday night youth activity. And it was to keep us out of trouble. And in my hometown, they cruised on Friday night, up and down the streets. And then to avoid us getting involved in that and some of the things that came with that, what our church did was we had Friday night youth activities. We would do something called a scavenger hunt. And every once in a while, 2 or 3 times a year, they would have this scavenger hunt. You'd have a big list of things. You'd go out and you'd try to find. And it'd be odd, weird things. Another kind of a scavenger hunt was we used a Polaroid camera. Now, some of you may not remember Polaroids, but it was the first instant camera. And the first ones you had, you'd take a picture and you'd wait 60 seconds and then you'd peel it off real carefully and there'd be the photograph. And I know that some of you who are under 20, you're like, wow. And, was there a big puff of smoke that came out? And, I know you, but that was a big deal. Eventually they had the kind where it made a really loud racket and it'd come out the front of it and you'd wave it and wait for it to dry. It'd take about 60 seconds and the picture would magically appear. That was a big time thing. So we'd take a Polaroid camera out and they'd give us a list of weird things to take a picture of, like the biggest nose you could find or something like that. And we would literally go up to people and say, you have a fine nose. Could I take a picture of it? It's a wonder we didn't get shot at some point. Well, my favorite one was a game that we played, which was called a bigger and better hunt. Has anybody here ever been on a bigger and better hunt? Okay, a couple of you probably grew up in a church or a youth act group at some point. But here's what it was. They would give you a little item, and then you would go to somebody's house and knock on their door and say, would you trade this item for something that's bigger and better? Now, again, this was the 70s. Things were different. Can you imagine taking, 50, 60 kids and dumping them off in a neighborhood and said, see you in 2 hours? Oh, by the way, go knock on random people's doors and negotiate with them, and you don't have a cell phone? And sure, you can come on in while we're looking. I mean, today you look at that and say, what were those people thinking? But it was a different time and a different era. So we would get like a Lego block or a paper clip or a toothpick, and off we'd go, scattered across the neighborhood, screaming like wild, crazy people. And we would go through and we would knock on somebody's door. Sir, I'm from such and such church and I've got this toothpick and I'm on a bigger and better hunt. Would you trade me something bigger or better for it? And it was amazing. They would say, well, yeah, I'll be right back. Or come on in. And we would stand there and we'd wait, and you'd hear them, and they're going through drawers, opening closets, things cluttering, and they come back. Sometimes they come back with an ink pen. This is bigger and better, right? Great. We'd grab that, head to the next house. Sir, I have something here in my hand I would like to give you, but you've got to trade me for bigger and better. And we come out, and they'd be a can of peas, and it kept getting bigger and better till by the end of the evening, we're hauling couches down the street, because it kept getting bigger and better. It was how we spent our evening, and it was a lot more fun than it apparently just sounded then, but that's how we would do. We sometimes live our life like that, don't we? We're searching for the next bigger or better thing. The first car we get, and it's a jalopy, right? It's horrible. It's belching smoke and dripping oil, but it's ours. We're happy with it. But then we want a 2-door, not a 4-door. Then we want with a sunroof, not just a regular coupe roof. And then we want one that's newer, and we want one that's a different color, and we want one that's more powerful. Then we want one that our neighbor doesn't have. And it's a constant pursuit of the bigger or better. We get our first apartment. We're living on our own. How cool. It's 1 bedroom, and everything's all in 1 room, but it's ours. And then all of a sudden, well, I need a bedroom. And then I need 2 bedrooms. And the kids come along, I need 4 bedrooms, and I want a garage, and I want a yard. And we keep trading up for bigger and better. We like our job. I'm glad to be working at the cash register. But then again, I would like to be a manager. And then I'd like to have my own office. And then I'd like to work at corporate. And we keep going and going, looking for the bigger and better. And one of the things that Solomon is saying is this: there is a pursuit of bigger and better that leads to emptiness. But there is also a bigger and better that leads to satisfaction. And it is the wise person who understands the better path, the better way. And that's where we're going to head this morning. There comes a point in most of our lives where we realize that a lot of the bigger and better pursuits that we have chased aren't all that. At some point in our life, we're going to bump into disappointment or injustice or some vain pursuit or some empty pleasure, and the satisfaction that we thought was going to be there isn't. And sometimes it gets very, very personal to us. Somebody close to us dies. Somebody that is wicked that we know flourishes. We watch the cheaters win. The agitators live in peace, and the peaceful live in conflict. Maybe we've been assigned to carry a deep or constant aching pain in our hearts that was left there by an illness or a death or a crime or a betrayal. And it seethes in our chest and it burns. And we wonder, is this really how it all is supposed to work out? Is this the end of it all? And we may face oppression or disillusionment or a loss of hope or crushing isolation. And we ask ourselves, couldn't it have been a little better? Well, we have a choice. And the choice is located here in Ecclesiastes Chapter 7. We can choose to enter a world of denial and escape and bitterness and depression, where we exude negativity and we chase mindless pleasures, or we revel in our brokenness, or we numb ourselves with alcohol or chemicals or promiscuity. But in the end, we've got to decide which path we choose in a broken world. We've got to decide whether we're going to go for that which is significantly better or temporarily seems to be better. We can choose frivolity, denial, escapism, or we can choose wisdom. Wisdom sometimes that is purchased with the currency of heartbreak, plus time, plus faith, plus patience, plus trust, plus perspective. We can learn to live with wisdom and dignity and purpose in the world that God created and which is now broken. Or we can succumb to the vanity, the smoke and mirrors, the vapid emptiness, and accept the limitations of our condition. So the choice is ours. And Solomon, as he is now shifting gears, is saying, choose the better path. There is a way of escape. There is hope to be found. There is a satisfaction that is not temporary. So let's look at it as we kind of march through chapter 7. Don't quit. Don't give up. Don't succumb to the darkness. Don't buy into the lies. Don't run toward escapism. Don't drown your sorrows in a bottle. Don't chase the cheap thrills made by lies that are appealing and promises that are empty. Choose the better path, the path of wisdom. Look in verse 1, and we see the first road mark on that path. It says, a good name is better. Here we go again, circling the word better, than precious ointment, and the day of death than the day of birth. Here's the first principle that Solomon is telling us. He's saying this: your reputation is important. Your name is important, and all that is attached to it. Everything that somebody thinks about when they say your name, don't forget the importance of that. Remember what Solomon also said, and by the way, we often will see parallels in the book of wisdom, which is the book of Proverbs. Proverbs is not a book of promises. Some people mistakenly look at it. It's a book of truisms. It's called the book of Proverbs, not the book of promises. And so we understand that these are ideals. These are things we hope for. These are things that are often the case, and these are things that we can generally count on in a world that is largely broken. And if you remember in Proverbs chapter 22, verse 1, the scripture says there, a good name is to be chosen rather than great riches. I remember my dad drilling this into my head when I was growing up. Often before I would go to work, or if I would go out on a date, or if I was going to go out and represent us in some way, he would stop me as I was going out the door and he'd say, remember your name. Now, when he would say to me, remember your name, he was saying, remember your reputation. He often would say to me that what takes you a lifetime to build up can be destroyed with one bad decision. What takes you years and years and years to build up as your reputation can be destroyed with one stupid action. So remember your reputation. Remember your name. And that is simply what Solomon is saying here. The first day of your life, you begin working on your epitaph. The first day that you are born is the day that you will begin working on what they're going to put in onto your tombstone. On that little part of your tombstone that is the dash between the day of your birth and the date of your death. What is it that represents, that little dash represents? Julie and I are kind of history buffs, and for some reason over the years we have liked to walk through cemeteries. And she and I have done this together. When I used to teach in Boston every year, sometimes I would run up downtown Boston. There's a big square there. I think is it Beacon Hill or something Hill, right in the middle of town. It's near the Old North Church and the Cheers bar is right around there. But there's this huge cemetery, and it has history in it galore. And you could literally be in there for weeks and not read all the tombstones and all the things that are on there. Julie and I often, over the years, would like to drive through Cades Cove. You know where Cades Cove is, over in the Smoky Mountains? If you ever go over to Gatlinburg, Dollywood, that area, and you go through Cades Cove, it's like a 15-mile long drive. You go the wrong time of year, it'll take you hours and hours because of all the tourists. But there's about 8 churches all along the way, and each of those churches has a cemetery. And we would stop and we would look at the cemeteries, and we would look at the tombstones and talk about who this was. And now it's kind of a tourist attraction, which is weird and kind of sick at a level, but it also is significant. And there was one cemetery I remember clearly where there was a large tombstone that had the husband, and another tombstone that had the wife, and then there was a series of small tombstones. And as we would look through them, we would see short lifespans of a child who had passed away at 3 or 5 or 7, and several where the day of their death was the day of their birth. There were others on other rows that they'd lived to be 70, 80, even in their 90s, where they had long, full lives, and their entire life was summed up in never more than a brief paragraph of 2 or 3 sentences, sometimes in just a single word or 2, like mother, like wife, like pastor. And sometimes it'd just be a simple sentence. He finished well. She did her best. And that was the summation of their life, their reputation. It's very rare that we put on a tombstone, dirty, cheating, lying dog. You don't usually put those kind of things on there. You put the good things, the things you want remembered. But it's amazing to us that how many of us live our lives with little regard to the reputation of our name, to the character that will be left behind. The other day I was in a I think it was a restaurant, if I remember correctly, and some lady walked by me, and apparently they really liked the cologne perfume that they had, so she put like a triple dose on. So I didn't really notice it when she walked away, but after she had left, and I could smell the perfume. But it was interesting. The perfume was the exact same perfume that my grandmother used to wear. And for just like a brief moment, I was like, where's grandma? My grandma's been gone for, 15 years, but I still think about her, and that smell brought it back. Sometimes it's a phrase. It's a favorite dish. It's a copy of a book. It's an envelope that we find in a box. And all of a sudden, the memories and the reputation come back. Here's what Solomon was saying. People are not going to remember you for the kind of car you drove. They're not going to remember you for how big your walk-in closet was. They're not going to remember you for how much you had in retirement or how many cruises you had taken. They're not going to remember you for the size of your lot line. They're not going to remember you for the location of your office, but they are going to remember you for your character and for your reputation. So pay attention to that. Look at what really matters. Here's another thing, and I'm going to spend more time on this one because the others kind of flow from it, so we'll kind of hurry through those. But Solomon seems to be encouraging the reader to consider the end and not just the journey. And isn't that the way? A lot of us, life is a marathon. It's not a buffet. And yet so many today live their life for all the different experiences they can have rather than the winning point at the end of the marathon. That's miles or years long. Yet the buffet is what kind of appeals to us, isn't it? When I was growing up, my kids were the biggest fans of the Golden Corral. I mean, if we saw a Golden Corral on vacation, it was like, we have to stop, Dad, we have to stop. They were so excited. And we were on vacation one year, and the Golden Corral would always have a new something they were featuring, like all you could eat steak or all you could eat shrimp. But this year, it was the arrival of the chocolate fountain, the big old chocolate fountain. And so my kids were like, Dad, it's vacation. We're going to stop at Golden Corral and we're going to eat at the chocolate fountain. Now, there's something about eating at a Golden Corral for me that causes short-term memory loss. Because every time I eat at a Golden Corral, as I'm walking out of it, I turn to my wife and I say, in the most authoritative tone, in the most definitive expression, I am never doing this again. I will not enter this place ever again as long as I live. I feel bloated. I feel greasy. I feel disgusted with myself. The food was nasty. The service was horrible. I will never do this again until we go to vacation again, and then I do it again. But my kids had talked me into it. And they're all standing in line at the dessert buffet, quivering in anticipation, their little hands around their plate as the line is waiting to get to the chocolate fountain. And everybody's just so excited. I'm going to have this, I'm going to have this. And there's this little girl right in front of my four ones, and she's standing there, and it's like, whoa, I'm in heaven. She takes her plate. She's got like a banana and 3 pieces of angel food cake, and she's running it back and forth. It's dripping off the sides. It's all over her hands. She licks her hands. Ooh, that's good. So she sticks her fingers out and does this, and sticks her fingers out and does this, and sticks her fingers out and does this, as it continues to cascade. I'm like, I'm out. I'm done. There we go. I'm through. Not my kids. So they're like, oh man, I'm going to do that too, right? This is wonderful. We look at those brief experiences and think, if only I could have this, one more piece of chicken, all you can eat steak, all the shrimp I can hold, the chocolate fountain. Then we go through life. If I have the big car, if I have the fancy job, if I have the second house, if I have that number of kids, if I have the trophy spouse, if I have all these things, then I'll be satisfied, I'll be complete, I'll be whole. And as we're walking out, we think, what was that all about? Why did I think that was so important? Why did I invest so much in that? And here's what Solomon was saying. Keep the important things in front of you. It's not about what you possess, but what possesses you. It's not all the words you use, but the words they use to describe you that are going to matter in the end. Life with an awareness that the long-term project of building our character is more important than the short-term thrills of living in the flesh is choosing the better path. Okay, here's my second point. I got all kinds of things I wanted to say on that, but I'm out of time. Number 2, look in verse 2. It's better to go to the house of mourning than the house of feasting. Now, that sounds contradictory. Who'd rather go to a funeral than a party? And he's saying, no. Understand this. In the end, focus on what really matters. And he says, the day of your death, the day of mourning, the funeral service is more important than the gender reveal. It's more important than the wedding day. It's more important than the big reunions. Keep the end in mind. In his book on leadership, Rudy Giuliani had a chapter that I'll never forget. And I realize Giuliani's kind of like gone wacko in the last several years, but he had a brilliant philosophy that emerged right after 9/11. And many people don't know this, but Giuliani, who was mayor of New York when 9/11 happened, went to the funeral of every single first responder that died that day. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of funerals over the course of several months. You could count on the fact that the mayor of New York, Rudy Giuliani, was going to be there. And in his book on leadership, he had a chapter entitled, Weddings Are Optional, Funerals Are Mandatory. Weddings are optional, funerals are mandatory. And the premise was this. Funerals are where you show respect. Funerals are where you honor accomplishment. Funerals are where we recall sacrifice. Be present at those moments. And that's what Solomon was saying in his own way. We have to appreciate that life is brief. There comes a day of account when the dash is placed, the final date is inscribed. And at that end, for the believer, it is the beginning. It is the start of something even better and even greater. But you need to remember your life has a conclusion. There will be a funeral. Why would he say that the sad house is better than the glad house? Life is brief. It's a vapor, a puff of smoke. It's Havel. But as I age, I remember this. Funerals call me to account. Mourning makes me remember. I love weddings. And quite frankly, I'll be honest with you, I love doing funerals. Not because I'm rejoicing in a death, but I like to rejoice for a believer who's lived their life with heaven in mind. And that can be a cause of celebration. The Bible says that to the eyes of God, the death of his saints is a blessing. Why might that be? Because he knows the whole picture. He knows what's ahead. He knows what we've been escaped from and freed of. Life is brief. Consider the day of your mourning, the day of your conclusion, the day of the ending. Living with the future in mind and not in the moment, with an acknowledgement that there comes a day of physical death and eternal judgment, is choosing the better path. It is walking in wisdom. Now, if you look in verse 5, it's better for a man to hear the rebuke of the wise than to hear the song of fools. For as the crackling of thorns under a pot, so is the laughter of the fools, that also is vanity. If you've ever gone camping or whatever, you may know that you need a little bit of kindling at the very beginning. And you may not be aware of this, but thorns make excellent kindling. And I grew up in an area where there was a lot of locust trees. Locust trees had big clumps of thorns. And if they were dry, you could take a clump of thorns and place it in a fire, light on fire, and it would just take off. I don't know what there was about them, but they would pop and crack. It's kind of like pine needles here in this part of the world. You know, we always did. I know I'm crazy, but a big thing for us, we always had a live Christmas tree. And the burning of the Christmas tree in the backyard was a big deal for my family. It was just a weird thing, but we would take the Christmas tree out and light it on fire, and the neighbors would think that Dan had lost his mind yet again. But it would be this huge pyramid of flames and black tarry smoke. And it was really exciting, but it only lasted about 60 seconds. By the time the fire department had come, it was like, what? What are you here for? I don't know what's going on. Why did somebody call you? But boy, for a moment, there was this huge explosion of pine needles and crackling and so forth. And this is the kind of the imagery that Solomon is leaving us with us here. He says the crackling of thorns under a pot is kind of like all the laughter that you have. And ha ha, this is a good time. And ha ha, did you hear that joke? And ha ha, but then it's over. Then it's gone. He said, but remember this. There are some people who aren't going to make you laugh. They're going to make you cry. They're the critics. They're the people that call you to caution and call you to account. They rebuke you when you're being an idiot. They say, hey, maybe you ought to think through that a little bit more. And so we need a purpose to learn from the critics. Purpose to learn from criticism. It's often been said that you'll learn more from your critics than you will your friends. I would suggest that maybe if you never hear criticism from your friends, you may need some new friends, because good friends tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear. Sometimes the correction of a friend hurts most and helps most. And in the end, there are some who absolutely run from any suggestion of negativity, any criticism, anything that doesn't affirm even their stupidest choices. Instead, they pursue laughter and frivolity and jokes and silliness and the crackling of thorns underneath the pot of life. And Solomon's saying, hey, you know what? There are times when you need to listen in humility to those who may see things that you are not seeing in your own life. I think there's something about age and experience and failure that creates humility. And if you live long enough, you're probably going to experience that. And those are important lessons to learn. But don't run from criticism. Instead, consider it. You see in verses 8 and 9, he goes on and says, better is the end of the thing than its beginning, and the patient in spirit is better than the proud in spirit. Wish I had time to take you through the full word study on this, but it's really quite fascinating. And if you get a chance to go through it later on this week, the word patience is another word for perseverance. And so sometimes this word actually talks about specifically about perseverance. But there's another word that comes from the Hebrew that is the word long suffering. And the term of long suffering is kind of an important one because it has the idea of perseverance and patience kind of tied up with it, and difficulty all tied up with it. And here's the bottom line. Sometimes waiting is hard. Sometimes enduring difficulty takes time. Letting something negative in your life play out to the conclusion is difficult. And yet, in that difficulty, we may be learning the important things, and we may be being humbled so that we can recognize the things we should be learning. Because sometimes life does humble us. There have been times in my life where it seemed like everything I touched turned to gold. But there have also been some times in my life, sometimes a decade or two in my life, where everything I touched turned to dust. When I look back on it, the lessons I learned from the difficult years are far more valuable to me today than the ones I earned during my golden years. And what I see during my golden years was a lot of hubris and arrogance with a side of cockiness. If you live long enough, you're going to fail. If you live long enough, you're going to be disappointed. If you live long enough, you're going to be like Solomon, and you're sitting there in your palace that doesn't seem so cool now, and you're looking at all of your wives who are not all that you thought they would be, and you're looking at the gardens that you spent all that money on, and you don't even get to go out and walk in them anymore, and you think about all the power you have, and you don't even care, and you're saying, was this really worth it? But in the long run, you also remember the lessons you've learned along the way. patience really is a virtue. And it's something that as we mature can be a gift that we share with others as well. Proverbs 14:29 says, "He who is slow to anger has great understanding, but he who is impulsive exalts folly." There is a temperance that comes with maturity, with aging, that allows us to say, don't quit, don't give up. The last chapter hasn't been written. You're still on the right side of the sod. God is still God. Don't give up. So the election didn't turn out the way you thought it should. Don't quit. You didn't get the promotion. Don't quit. Your kids are driving you nuts. Don't quit. You lost your job. Don't quit. You didn't get the house you bid on. Don't stop. Long suffering. To be long in spirit is literally what this verse is saying. To be long in spirit is better to be than high in spirit. You see, we want the thrill with winning. We want the thrill with acquiring. We want the thrill that comes with success. But sometimes the better lesson, the better path, the better way is the patience that comes with suffering long. Because remember, this is smoke and mirrors. This is a vapor that appears for a while and is gone. The best is yet to come. Then if you would quickly look in verses 10 through 12. Say not, why were the former days better than these? For it is not from wisdom that you ask this. Wisdom is good with an inheritance, an advantage to those who see the sun. For the protection of wisdom is like the protection of money, and the advantage of knowledge is that wisdom preserves the life of him who has it. Bottom line here is we need to learn to be satisfied with the life we have. Impatience and pride is what makes us say things like the guy in verse 10 said. Oh, remember the good old days? Remember the former days? They were a lot better than this. And don't we do this? And this is really annoying. I do this all the time, and it just annoys me to death, and I keep doing it. And my kids, when they hear me saying, back in the good old days, back when I was a kid, back when I started my ministry, back, and I can see them out of the corner of my eye going, oh, here goes Dad again, It's a tendency of living long enough, you start looking at the old days, and you know what we do? We sanitize them and we glamorize them. Was criticized. I looked out at a restaurant the other day. Everybody in the restaurant was looking at their phone. Of course, I had just finished looking at my phone, but I'm superior, right? I had a reason. So I started saying things like, look at everybody looking on their phone. I remember the day. Here I go. I'm going into cranky Dan mode, right? I remember the days when we sat at dinner tables and had meaningful and intelligent conversations and discussed great books that we read and all kinds of nonsense. I'm just going off. But I stopped and think about those days. I also remember the days when we didn't have cell phones, and whenever my dad needed to hear something from my mom would say, go tell your dad this, and Dad was on the back 40. It was a 30-minute walk, through the snow, 20 degrees below zero. Yeah, that was not fun. And that was real. You remember, some of you, I go in my car now, and I have a fob in my pocket. I slide across my heated comfortable seats on leather, rich Corinthian leather, and I slide in and I just press a button and it starts every single time. How many times did I go across the cloth, cold, dark, hard seats of my car in the middle of a Missouri winter to turn it and it go, or click, 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 And so what do? You get out of the car, you open the hood, you look under it, the hood falls on your head, and you say, where's the ether? Anybody remember the ether? You had a big spray can. And you'd loosen the carburetor, you'd squirt it in there. And then you remembered, well, there was no battery left. It's not going to do good to turn it over, so I got to get a jump. So you had to find somebody who had a car that did start in the middle of the morning. If not, what you did, if you had a manual transmission, you got the tractor out and you pulled the car with a chain. Yeah, those were not good days. Not good days at all. I'm thankful to live in the day of push-button starts on my cars. But what we do is we glamorize it. Were there good times in the bed in the former days? Yes. Are there good times today? Yes. It's a matter of perspective. And we need to be satisfied with our life as it is today. I'm glad to live in a day with hand sanitizer. And as bad as COVID is, it's not as bad as other pandemics that killed 40% of the population of the world at that time, like the Black Plague, what it did in Europe. So I'm glad that even if I am dying, they can give me drugs. All right? So I don't have to scream my way into eternity. I'm a sissy. All right? I like toilet paper. Even if it's in short supply, usually you can find some somewhere, right? And bargain for it with your neighbor. We live in a great time. We live in a wonderful day. We live with great opportunity. And for us to curse this day is to curse what God has assigned for us to use for our good and his glory. And Solomon said, learn to be satisfied with your life. Quit talking about the past was all that. Last thing is this, and this is the most important thing. When you see it in verses 13 and 14, it begins, consider the work of God. And if there's one theme that I hope to hammer into us by the time we conclude this book is this. God is God, we are not, and we're not all that. Most of the frustration that you and I feel is because we want to be something in this universe that God did not create us to be, and that is the center. We live this life of entitlement and an expectation that the world revolves around us and that God exists for our pleasure. And as long as we live that way, from Solomon's lips to our ears, we need to remember it's going to feel empty. We have to accept that we live in a broken world that is designed by a sovereign God who in the end has provided us a way of escape and promises us an incredible eternity. But we're not in the eternity yet. We're still in the broken part. And the world does not exist for our pleasure, but for his pleasure. The heavens declare the glory of God, not the glory of Dan. The firmament declares his majesty, not my majesty. I'm an ant on a giant universe of anthills. And when I accept my role and who God is, I can take pleasure in my assignment. Now that runs counter to what the world wants to tell you. Be all you can be. It's all about you. What your mind can conceive, you can achieve. Live your best life now. Your happiness matters. It's all about me. Live your truth. Those are all lies from Satan. It's all about God. There's one truth and it's his truth. We're created in his image and blessed to be so. But we are the creation, not the creator. There is joy to be found in our existence, but it's the joy of the creation, not the joy of the creator. God does not exist to serve us. God does not exist to make our life better or more pleasurable. We exist to do that for him. And until we accept the way the universe is run by a loving God, we'll always feel dissatisfied. But when we can say, because I know him and he knows me and I am one of his, I can be satisfied today with what I have and where I am, because this is not all there is. And the best is yet to come. When we get to that point, we've reached wisdom. And when we follow that path, we've chosen the better path. There are those today who live frustrated lives of broken dreams and constant loss because they think this is all there is. They live in the moment. They want an experience. They're putting their hands under every chocolate fountain they can find and wonder why they still feel nasty. It's because we don't know our place. We don't know our Creator. There is a godly, holy satisfaction that can exist in our life, whether we live in a palace or whether we live in the ghetto. Whether we're rich or poor, educated or uneducated, regardless of where we were born or when we were born, there is a place of godly contentment that God desires for us to have. And then we'll see him for who he really is. And we'll know peace in this moment, peace in this day, a peace that cannot be purchased with another palace, another wife, a longer life, or anything else. So for us, we should choose the better path.